Just days ago, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled some felons are allowed to own guns. Janae Bowens with the Fact Check team. She is here to discuss. Janae, we know there's a lot of layers to this. Which felons are allowed to have guns?
So yeah, Dee Dee, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled people convicted of nonviolent crimes who have finished their prison sentence are allowed to own guns. Now, Stephen Duarte is at the center of this ruling out of California. He has 5 prior nonviolent state criminal convictions, and then he was convicted for tossing a handgun out of a moving car. Now, the court ruled he was protected under the Second Amendment since he is a nonviolent offender who has served his time in prison and re-entered society.
Welcome back to the channel. I know I said I was going to continue to keep you guys updated as these cases move their way through the Supreme Court. We just had some really good news on one of them. This one is coming to us out of the Ninth Circuit, which happens to be one of the most anti-gun circuits in the country. So for them to rule the way they did is completely amazing. This case is going to be Durante versus the United States of America out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, I'm not going to read the entire brief to you because it's really lengthy, but I'm going to give you guys an overall summary and what I took and what I thought was important about this case. Steve Durante was a non-violent convicted felon. I think he was convicted of like doing vandalism or some graffiti or something. He was also convicted of possession of firearms, fleeing from police. He had a small criminal rap sheet, but it wasn't anything violent and it wasn't anything too egregious on his criminal rap sheet. Now, this doesn't mean that people with egregious records are not going to get their gun rights back, but in this particular case, I just wanted to give you the circumstances of what he did and why he was in court. Reversing the district court's judgment, the panel vacated Stephen Durante's conviction for violating 18 U.S.C. 922 G1, which makes it a crime for any person to possess a firearm if he has been convicted of an offense punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year. On appeal, Durante challenged his conviction on Second Amendment grounds, which for the panel reviewed de novo rather than plain error because Durante had good cause for not raising the claim in the district court when the United States v. Vonsque foreclosed his argument. The panel held that under New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin violates the Second Amendment as it applies to Durante, a nonviolent offender who has served his time in prison and re-entered society, and that Vonsque, which did not apply the mode of analysis that Bruin later established and now requires courts to perform, is clearly irreconcilable with Bruin. Applying Bruin's two-step text and framework history, the panel concluded that Durante's weapon, a handgun, is an arm within the meaning of the Second Amendment's text, that Durante's proposed course of conduct, carrying a handgun publicly for self-defense, falls within the Second Amendment's plain language, and that Durante is a part of the people whom the Second Amendment protects because he is an American citizen, and the government failed to prove that 922 G1's categorical prohibition as applied to Durante is part of the historical tradition that the limits are outer bounds of the Second Amendment. So they're going back and finding that some of these older rulings no longer apply because of the Bruin decision, essentially saying that just because a person has a felony conviction doesn't mean that they are barred from exercising their Second Amendment rights, and continuing to go as far as saying that the Second Amendment applies to convicted felons. Now, I'm going to reiterate something that I said in some of my previous videos. This case specifically applies to Durante. He took his case to court. He sued the government. He won based off the Bruin decision. Just because you live in that same district where this court case happens doesn't mean that you automatically get the right to bear arms. He has his right, but anybody who takes this lawsuit in that district is 9 times out of 10, they're going to get the exact same ruling that Durante got when he took his case to court. Now, just as important as the fact that he won and the reason that they say he won, we do expect these cases to go to the Supreme Court. So I think it's important for us to understand what the dissenting judge's view was. This was a 2-1 decision, and this is what the dissenting judge had to say, why he decided that he didn't believe that this applied to convicted felons. The majority claims that the Supreme Court did not even suggest in Heller or Bruin that felons are not amongst the people within the meaning of the Second Amendment. Quoting our recent decision, United States v. Perez-Garcia, but Perez-Garcia itself notes that when the Supreme Court specifically analyzed the limitations on the scope of the Second Amendment's protections, Heller described the Second Amendment rights as belonging to law-abiding citizens, responsible citizens. That Bruin, in turn, uses the term law-abiding, responsible citizens and its variants more than a dozen times when describing the Second Amendment scope, and that brewing concurrences reiterated the same point. So what he's saying there in his view is that both of these cases applied to law-abiding citizens, and if I continue to go on, he's going to say that convicted felons are not law-abiding citizens. Me, I am a law-abiding citizen. That is the purpose of this channel, is to show people that when a convicted felon gets his gun rights back, you don't have to fear that. We're not all gonna go out there and commit some egregious acts, commit robberies, terrorism, treason. We're just regular people. We like the hobby, we like guns, we like going to shoot, and we want the right to defend ourselves and defend our family. That is what the Second Amendment stands for. That is what it means, and that is the reason the other judges saw it the way that they saw it. Now, what he went on to say, I think, was really, really interesting, and in my opinion, this is where the Supreme Court is going to argue back and forth the most when it comes to deciding whether or not convicted felons will have their right to keep and bear arms. Finally, we observe that most scholars of the Second Amendment agree that the right to bear arms was inextricably tied to the concept of a virtuous citizenry that would protect society through defense of use of arms against criminals, oppressive officials, and foreign enemies alike, and that the right to bear arms does not preclude laws discriminating the unvirtuous citizens. Don B. Gates, Jr., noting that felons were excluded from the right to bear arms because they were deemed incapable of virtue. We recognize how the historical question has not been definitively resolved. So getting into the argument of virtue, this country has 19 million convicted felons, and if all of them were unvirtuous, then we would have a lot more problems, a lot more crime, and a lot more riffraff in our society. Going back to the video I made about the convicted felon who saved that officer's life, are you saying that he was incapable of virtue? Statements like these are why I feel like this channel and what I'm doing here is so important. Using this platform to educate not just felons, but also the general public of the Second Amendment, that when you give a felon their gun rights back, they're not going to go out and go crazy. The argument this judge has made about virtue is why I feel like this channel is so important. Perhaps this judge has no convicted felons in his family, and he's never actually had a conversation or any dialogue at length with one. Therefore, he doesn't understand convicted felons are not like what you see in the movies. We're not going to get out of prison and go bonkers. Most of us, when we get out of prison, we do not want to go back. Hopefully this channel can give people some light on what it looks like when a convicted felon gets their gun rights back. Hunting, sport, target practice, training my kid on how to use a gun, and just being present and having the ability to defend my family if an intruder did come into my home and threaten my family's life. If there was an actual belief that once a person committed a crime that they were incapable of displaying virtue, then why would you let them out into the public? Once you've freed yourself from your sentence, once you've paid your debt to society, then you definitely deserve the right to keep and bear arms. As more of these cases go to these circuit judges and eventually work their way up to the Supreme Court, I'm going to keep you guys updated. But also I want to keep you guys updated on my progress and the things that I like to do with my firearms, just to show the general public what a virtuous individual looks like as a law-abiding citizen and an owner of firearms. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, guard your freedom, my friends.